Yo, everybody! Welcome into the 33rd episode of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. It's conference championship week in college football, one of my favorite weeks of the year.
Let's go.
We're introducing a new segment today to Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. It's called Gut Check. I think you guys will thoroughly enjoy that. And then we're also going to be taking a sneak peek into next year, 2024, as new conferences are made and we get new matchups, new teams in new conferences, specifically Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners going into the SEC. Some of the matchups and dates for next year's SEC schedule were released earlier this week, so we will take a sneak peek into that at the end of the show. But since it's conference championship week, you know I had to bring on fellow Longhorn fan and frequent guest of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports, Emmy Nixon. How are you, Emmy?
I'm good, man. I mean, it's conference week. It's conference championship week. We made it. This was the goal from week one. This was the goal from the preseason we had for this team the whole way through for Texas in particular, obviously. This is a Texas show. We wanted to just get to Arlington. That was the goal. And we did that, and now it's time to go win. And hopefully the rest of it can take care of itself, and maybe we'll be looking at a playoff bid, maybe.
Possibly. It's quite possible. And I think if you told Texas fans that this would be their situation come conference championship week, that they would have at least a shot to win the conference championship and get in the playoff, I think they would have taken that at the beginning of this year. Year 3 of Steve Sarkisian, year 2 of Quinn Ewers at quarterback, with a talented roster coming back and some transfers that we really liked going all the way back to the offseason in A.D. Mitchell, Gavin Holmes. There were some questions around this team, of course, one of which being the running back position, which actually turned out to be one of the strong rooms on this Longhorn roster. One of the strongest rooms on this Longhorn roster, actually.
The strongest rooms in the country.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's going to continue moving forward with the way that running backs coach Tashard Choice is recruiting that position. But yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you told Texas fans this would be your situation. You're going to get a chance to beat Mike Gundy, who's given you problems historically in the Big 12 at Oklahoma State on your way out after you just absolutely throttled Texas Tech at home in what was a memorable game at your last Big 12 home game. You win by 50, and now you get the chance to beat Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State on your way out of the Big 12. And you have Big 12 Commissioner Brett Yormark, after all that he said about Texas, have to hand you that Big 12 championship trophy on Saturday afternoon when that game concludes. Like, that's the best case scenario for I think Texas fans coming into this year. Even if they don't end up getting one of the 4 spots in the playoffs. So that's kind of the opening monologue. Anything you want to add to that before we get to our conference championship game breakdowns?
No, not really. I mean, can't get ahead of ourselves, but it's so close. We're so close.
Absolutely. But now, since you got there, Texas fans expect you to win. And we'll get to that here in a moment. But we're going to go in chronological order. And even though that Texas-Oklahoma State game will kick at 11 a.m. or around then on Saturday, it's actually not the first Power 5 conference championship game that will be taking place. There will be one on Friday night, and this one could actually end up being the best game of them all, as we're going to get a rematch of Oregon and Washington for the Pac-12 championship game. And, going all the way back to whenever that was, October, when this game first happened, back in like week 6 or 7, I can't remember exactly when it was, up there in Seattle. After the game, we kind of knew, with USC starting to struggle a little bit, we kind of knew like this, as long as these teams take care of business, which they did, we get to see this again. And I'll say this, and then I'll give it to you for what you expect to see in this game and how each team can win. What are the keys for each team, like we always do? I think the winner of this game, whether it's Washington or Oregon, is getting a spot in the playoff.
Yeah,
I think
regardless.
this is a win and in situation here. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a reason Oregon is favored by 9.5 in this game. It's not, saying that Washington's win over them was a fluke. That's not what it's saying at all. But I think the general consensus and my general feeling is that Oregon doesn't have to do anything that they haven't been doing to win this football game. This is in their wheelhouse as a team, as just a physical team up front with just high-end edged pieces. I mean, the defense has come together extremely well. It looks like a team that's ready to make a statement. With that being said, though, the skill talent that Washington has, that I think will be the key to the game for Washington. If Roma Dunze comes out and dominates this game, along with some of their other weapons, and Michael Penix Jr. goes out and plays out of his mind, then we're looking at a coin flip. It's going to be very similar to that scenario in Seattle, if that is the case. But Oregon, I think, will come in with a better approach this time around, and a mindset of we're going to control time of possession. We're going to control what we can control. And the thinking is third down is going to be the difference in the game to me. Fourth down, last time around, Oregon failed, I don't think, 2 or 3 key fourth downs late in the game. But I think the execution from Oregon, we've seen it time and time again. I think it has progressed throughout the season. And I think Oregon is just the better overall football team. I think Washington is going to have a special type of performance, which is possible, but that's not something that I'm going to bet on or pick.
I think you nailed it on the head. Oregon is one of the best at converting third downs in the country, and they have been the entire season. They rank third right now in the country behind LSU's dynamic offense with Jaden Daniels, and then, of course, Georgia, for third down conversion rate in the country at 52.76%. They're converting at that high of a clip on third downs. Washington, while they're not a terrible third down defense, they're not anything special. This is what it comes down to. The weighty downs, as Mike Tomlin likes to say, on third down. And I think that Oregon is just flat out the better, more talented team. I think Bo Nix will have time to throw. Oregon has allowed only 5 sacks this year from that offensive line, the fewest given up by any FBS team. Washington, on the other hand, they struggle and have struggled to create pressure on opposing quarterbacks. They rank 110th in sacks defensively, mustering just 19 on the season. I think Oregon, with that offensive line, is going to run Bucky Irving right at this Washington defense, create manageable third down situations. And I think Bo Nix, with what he's been able to do and how accurate he is with the football, will be able to make plays on third down. And if it comes to fourth down, well, that's where it comes down to Dan Lanning and his decision making. How aggressive will he be in a game like this, where I think the winner gets into the playoff? I think it depends on the scenario, the field position, how much time is on the clock. There are a lot of factors that, of course, will play into that, but I think Dan Lanning is going to be who he is, and he's going to be very, very aggressive because I don't know that. Well, I mean, if Washington wins, they're in. 13-0 undefeated Power 5 conference champion is getting in the playoff. And they would be deserving because then they would have 2 wins over Oregon, 1 on their home field and then 1 on a neutral field. But I just think, and I do think Washington, my gut tells me Washington will find a way to cover whatever it is, the 9.5 point spread. But I do think I do have Oregon winning in my mind by like 7 to 10 points. Because I do think the stakes are high enough to where I think Washington, with Odunze, with Jalen McMillan, with all the weapons that they have, and with how good Michael Penix has been, will put up a fight in this game. But I do like Oregon to win and make the college football playoff. I think they're the better team.
Yeah, I think so too. I think this time around, I think they're just going to be sharper. I really do. And there were some points on, crucial third downs in that first game where I thought they almost played for fourth down. They kind of threw it short of the stick so they could go for it. I think this is the kind of game where Oregon's just going to attack right from the jump. I could easily see them coming out being like, we're going to take the football to start the game and maybe go play action deep shot right from the jump and really try to take a hold of this thing.
Yeah, I think Oregon's going to run heavy dose of Bucky Irving to make sure that they're in those third and manageable situations, because this offensive line is going to give Bo Nix time to throw. That was possibly the best environment in college football the first time around. In Seattle, at Husky Stadium. But even in that raucous environment at home, Washington still struggled to get to Bo Nix. They only finished with 1 sack in that game. And, that 1 sack did lead to one of the Oregon Ducks' 2 punts on the day. The others being, of course, fourth down conversion attempts. But I just think Washington's going to struggle to get pressure, not only because Oregon's offensive line is just really, really good, but I think some of the running game with Bucky Irving will kind of neutralize the pass rush because they'll get into these third and shorts. third and manageable situations, third and mediums. And Bo Nix with Troy Franklin and everybody else he has available to him at his disposal, with how accurate he is and how good he's been, and with the plays that he can make outside the pocket, I just think it'll be a little too much for Washington. And on the other side of the ball, I think Oregon's defense has a much better chance of getting to Michael Penix and affecting Michael Penix Jr., as he's not so much. I mean, believe me, he's a masterful pocket passer, but he's not so much the runner and the athlete outside the pocket that, say, maybe a Bo Nix or some of these other elite quarterbacks around college football are. That's just not who he is. And I think Oregon has a much better chance of affecting Penix into maybe a turnover than Washington does.
Right.
So, look, I think Dan Lanning's doing a great job. I'm going to say my score is going to be Oregon 34, Washington 24. So I'm actually going to have Oregon barely covering that spread.
Yeah, I think
34-20.
I think it'll be close maybe throughout the first half, but I think Oregon will pull away in the second half. I'm going to say 38-20 Oregon.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Let's move to Saturday and let's talk about Texas playing Oklahoma State. Now, for a while on Saturday, it looked like we may be sitting here talking about a Red River rematch with Oklahoma and Texas. I think a lot of people would have liked to see that, but that did not end up happening. So it's a moot point. Oklahoma State came back. They beat BYU in double overtime or whatever it was. Ollie Gordon scored 5 touchdowns. And today he secured Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year. While your man, your fellow Texas Longhorn, T'Vondre Sweat, won Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year. Anthony Hill, the freshman linebacker, won Big 12 Defensive Freshman of the Year. And there were a couple other Longhorn awards. Longhorns got 7 first-team Big 12 honorees and then 3 second-team Big 12 honorees. So it was a big day for Texas from an award standpoint. The surprising thing was, as if Texas didn't need any more bulletin board material than it's already gotten so far this season, was that not only did Mike Gundy, the coach that they will face on Saturday, win the Big 12 Coach of the Year after he lost to UCF by 42 and South Alabama by 4 touchdowns at home, but the fact that Steve Sarkisian didn't even garner a single vote. So that's on Texas's minds. A couple other things are on Texas's minds. We saw what this kind of bulletin board material can do for a really talented team. So I'll start with you. Given all that, and the last thing I'll mention, A.D. Mitchell won Big 12 Newcomer of the Year. So where do you stand on this game? I know the line has been creeping up all week. It started at like 10.5, 11.5, and I think the last time I checked, it was up to 14.5, which I think is about right. What do you think?
Well, I think Texas is peaking at the right time. I really do believe that. I think last week was Texas's best offensive performance, 4 quarters of really just smart football throughout and just efficient football throughout. And the matchup here really fits Texas. If you think of Texas, you think of stopping the run in the trenches. And what Oklahoma State wants to do is run the crap out of the football with Ollie Gordon. That is their bread and butter. That is their main offense. So I have a lot of confidence in Texas being able to shut that down and force this Oklahoma State QB. I can't think of his name at the moment. He had a rough game against BYU for the most part, but he's been up and down throughout the season. He's had his good moments. He's had his rough moments. Um, the key is to force him to throw into tight windows. I think if you're Texas, you got to trust that your athletes can win on the outside defensively. And I want to see a little bit of, man to man and force this team to throw into tight windows and, convert those tight window throws. Because I don't know if they'll be able to do it consistently enough to give Texas a fight in this game. So I'm going to pick Texas to win. I think the key will be the defense. I think the defense will have a great showing. I'm going to pick Texas to win 31-10.
Okay. Keep in mind that I saw a stat. 8 straight Big 12 championship games have gone under on the point total. So I'm not saying that will be the case Saturday, but if you're betting on this game, you might take that into consideration. Yeah, you're right about all of that. Not only has T'Vondre Sweat won the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year award, he's also been named a finalist for the Outland Trophy, which is given to the nation's top interior linemen. So that speaks to the level that T'Vondre Sweat has played to this year. Look, this matchup fits Texas perfectly. Number one, they're just stellar. They're a stellar run defense. Like this, I think will go down as one of the best Texas run defenses that we've ever seen in program history. With T'Vondre Sweat and, of course, Byron Murphy clogging up the middle. And then the guys behind him have done a fantastic job. Anthony Hill has gotten so much better from where he was at the beginning of the season. Jalen Ford, of course, being the former All-American caliber player that he is still. David Binda's played a big role in that group. They're just fantastic. And then the secondary has done a really good job. Guys like Jahdae Barron, Jalen Catalon have done a fantastic job of tackling in space, largely in the running game. And that's what's led to the 4th-ranked rushing defense in the entire country, 85 yards per game. They just do not allow teams to run on them. There was a streak earlier this year where Texas held 5 consecutive opponents, starting with Houston, going to BYU, K-State, TCU, and Iowa State. They held all 5 of those opponents to less than 100 rushing yards. And they held Iowa State collectively to less than 10 rushing yards. That was their longest streak since 2009. Not only are they so good in run defense, but they also lead the country in both 3rd down defense and red zone defense. They're great when they have to be, for the most part. Now, there have been some questions about the passing defense, but I think Saturday or Friday, whenever that Texas Tech game was by far the best that secondary has looked in a long, long time. And I do not think Oklahoma State possesses the receivers nor the quarterback to really threaten Texas down the field. I just don't. Maybe I'll be proven wrong on that, but I don't think that. So I don't think Texas is going to be very worried about being beat over the top. I think they're going to play more of that press coverage that we saw on Friday night against Texas Tech. And I think they will get some pressure on what is his name? Bowman, the quarterback there. Texas also ranks 12th in scoring defense this year and 27th in first down defense. Now here's the question. How does Texas lose this game? Like, what would have to happen for Oklahoma State to win? Texas turns the ball over, period. Like, that's really the only scenario I really see for the path for Oklahoma State. What is it? Well, you get Texas in the run game with Ollie Gordon, who's a fantastic player. There's no denying that. He's a finalist for the Doak Walker Award, and he's probably going to win it when it's all said and done. And this defense, this Oklahoma State defense, while they do rank at near the bottom of the Big 12 in a lot of categories, they are opportunistic. They force a lot of turnovers. They've produced 18 total turnovers in their past 8 games. And this is the key stat, I think, to me. Oklahoma State, when they win or tie the turnover battle this year, they're 9-0. So if you're Texas, that's got to be a thing you key in on. Now, Texas has done largely a very good job of taking care of the football. But if you turn the ball over 2 or 3 times in this game, you get a little sloppy, you could find yourself in a fourth quarter game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Or even down in the fourth quarter, which is definitely a scenario you don't want to find yourself in. So that's the thing for Oklahoma State. That the opportunistic defense forces a couple turnovers. And the last thing I'll say, Oklahoma State does have a couple guys that can get after the passer. They do have a couple really capable guys who have gotten to the quarterback, forced fumbles. They do have, I think, one of the better pass rushes that Texas will have faced up to this point this season. Not saying it's a great pass rush, but I think of the group of pass rushes that Texas has faced this year, it's probably in the top 3 or 4. And I've watched some of Oklahoma State. I watched them against Oklahoma. I've watched a couple of their games this year. And I see the capability of this group. Now, what they aren't really good at is stopping the run. So if you're Texas, you just run right at them with C.J. Baxter, Jaden Blue, whoever the hell you want to run at them, do it. They don't really have the guys on the interior of the lines of scrimmage to win against the athletes and the big bodies that Texas has. But on the outside, on that defense, they do have guys that are capable of getting after the passer. The problem is that Texas has one of the best pairs of offensive tackles in the country with Christian Jones and Kelvin Banks. So it's just, I think Josh Pate said it last night on his show. Anything you can find, any path that you can find for Oklahoma State, immediately there's something in their way. Like Texas just matches up very well with this Oklahoma State team. Like
it's almost too good to be true in a way.
Ollie Gordon's fantastic. Like this is how they win. They run the ball. Well, nobody has run the ball on Texas, not even Alabama. They got a good pass rush. Well, Texas has one of the best offensive lines in the country. They have, maybe you could argue, the best pair of tackles in the country. Oklahoma State forces a lot of turnovers. Well, yeah, but Texas really takes care of the football. It's just like Mike Gundy. A lot of respect for Mike Gundy and the job that he's done at Oklahoma State over the years. But I just don't think they're dynamic enough on offense. And I think Texas will put it on them, hopefully.
Yeah.
I haven't really predicted a beatdown so far this year. But I do think Texas will put it on them a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too.
in this game.
and they
I'm
need
going to
to
predict.
just from a committee standpoint. If they're looking at Texas in a tight ball game, tight win versus a dominant, huge win. Like say back in the day when it was Ohio State, Cardell Jones, and that team, they looked like they weren't going to make the playoff, and then they beat Wisconsin 59-0, and all of a sudden you can't keep them out. That's the position Texas needs to look to be in. Put the pressure
I'm
on
going
the
to
committee.
predict. I'm going to say Texas wins 44-20.
Okay.
44-20. Might be 45-20. 44-20 was just the first thing that popped into my mind. So I'm going to go with that. I think it'll be around a 3-touchdown, maybe 4-touchdown margin of victory when it's all said and done, kind of like you had. But I do think Oklahoma State will.
Put up some more points.
I mean, I think we're right in the same ballpark.
Right. Yeah.
So, with all that being said, let's talk about the big one in Atlanta. Let's talk about the SEC championship game. Now, this has been set even before last week. This game was set. We knew this was going to be the game, and we've had time to kind of think about it. We knew that even going into to rivalry week, where I don't think you say Georgia nor Alabama played anywhere close to a great game, particularly Alabama when you look at it. We knew that these were the teams that a couple of the best teams in the country. Like they were passing the eye tests. They looked like Georgia and Alabama. Now they're going to meet Atlanta for the SEC championship game. I believe the last time that I checked, Georgia's about a 5.5, 6-point favorite in this game. So what are your first thoughts on this game? And who do you have winning?
This Alabama team feels like they have a different type of mojo at the moment. Like this is a team nobody in the country wants to play, not even Georgia. We knew this was going to be a battle, obviously. Like this is the two titans in the SEC, the two teams that recruit against each other continuously. But man, I just can't look at this Alabama team from where they were at the start of the year and where they are now and just not think like they've came all this way. It feels like they're ready to make a statement. That's what it feels like. Now, what my brain is telling me, what the football would tell you, is Georgia has been dominant the entire season and really the past 3 years, but they've began to run the football again. That's the thing. Early in the season, when we were kind of questioning, oh, is Georgia maybe not as good as they were a few years back? Like maybe their defense isn't quite as dominant. They're not running the football as good. That's not really the case now. And they're getting Brock Bowers and McConkey back this week, presumably. So I don't know who I'm gonna pick in this game, and I don't know if I'm gonna make a pick for this game. I don't really know who's gonna win. I just can't wait to watch. That's really all it is. I have a feel for. I think it's going to be a defensive battle. I think it's going to come down to a few plays here and there in the fourth quarter, as it always seems to. And I mean, I think it's going to come down to third downs and maybe just whichever quarterback gets it done in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, this has always been the game. These are the two Titans in the SEC, as you mentioned. They're playing in Atlanta. We're actually Um, I don't think Kirby Smart's ever taken down Nick Saban in this particular game when it's played at in Atlanta. Georgia has been fantastic for at least the past 2 months. They have been the clear, I think, number one team in the country. And you mentioned the running game, but their offensive line with those freaks up front uh, are fantastic. They're 6 in sacks allowed, fewer than one a game, and they're number 11 nationally in tackles for loss allowed per game, 3.92. I think this offensive line is going to hold up fairly well against. I expect this Georgia offensive line to hold up fairly well and to kind of lean on this Bama defensive line just a little bit. I think Kendall Milton, the running back who's gotten healthy, is going to have success in the running game. I don't know if he gets over 100 yards, but I think if Auburn can have the success that they had on the ground versus the Tide without really the threat of the passing game that Georgia possesses with Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, I think the Bulldogs should be able to run the football. And I think a couple guys up front are a little banged up for Alabama on that side of the ball. We know about the edge rush duo, Dallas Turner and what is his name? Goodness, it'll come to me. Chris Braswell. Chris Braswell, the other guy on the other side. We know they're fantastic, and we know they can wreck a game. They're going to have to get to Carson Beck and force some turnovers. Because I think if Carson Beck has a clean pocket with the weapons that he has and Dominic Lovett and Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers, who made such a difference, it'll be hard for Bama to generate stops. But at the end of the day, what this really is going to come down to is what it usually does. The turnover battle, third downs, and red zone. Like, there's really not much else you can really say. When two big-time programs, two almost like miniature NFL teams in some respects, get together and they play a football game on a neutral field. I think for Georgia defensively, they're going to every time, I think it was either it was Josh Pate who mentioned this last night on his show. Every time that Georgia has been run on a little bit, they've come back the next week and they just absolutely shut that shit down, if you will. I think it was, who was it back? It was Kentucky that ran all over Florida. Remember that way back when? The next week, people were talking about Kentucky. Oh, maybe they can. This was when Georgia was kind of struggling to stop the run. Like, oh, maybe they can have success on the ground and keep this game close. No, none of that happened. Georgia shut that crap down. I think last week's performance against Georgia Tech, where Haynes King, the quarterback for Georgia Tech, and that Georgia Tech team did have some success running the football on Georgia. I think Georgia will come ready to play up front. I think they're going to do a fairly good job stopping the run in this game. Alabama's running game has progressed throughout the season, but I think Georgia will come prepared, and that will be an absolute dogfight. I can also go back to when I think it was Auburn who also had some success running on Georgia. And the very next week, I believe it was Ole Miss that came to town, and Georgia just shut that down.
Yep.
Ole Miss didn't have any success whatsoever. Neither did really Tennessee running the ball in that game, and that's Tennessee's strong suit. I'm leaning Georgia in this game, but another part of me kind of thinks Alabama could. I mean, either way it goes, maybe I'm just part of me deep down what needs Georgia to win.
Yeah.
The last thing I need as a Texas fan, last thing we need as Texas fans is for the Alabama factor to enter the equation. Because not only, and this is what people are not thinking about right now, the people who are kind of just casual viewers to the college football landscape, it's that if Alabama wins this game, there will be a one-loss SEC champion. And rarely does the SEC champion, if I don't think ever, has gotten left out of the playoff. But what the committee has been telling us, and that's not the point that I wanted to make. The point I want to make is what the committee has been telling us and what the AP voters have been telling us the past couple of weeks is that they think Georgia's fantastic. They think they are the flat out best team in the country. And it's hard for me to believe that, say, Alabama wins this game by a field goal, depending on whatever else happens in college football, that the winners of 29 consecutive SEC games, with how dominant Georgia has been this year, dominating Missouri, really dominating Tennessee. The way that they finished this season, it's hard for me to believe that with a close loss, you can't absolutely rule out a scenario where the committee themselves, and I'm not saying I agree with this, where the committee would drop Georgia from the clear number one to all the way out of the playoff.
Yeah, I don't see it. I don't think that would happen. No.
So we just, the point I'm trying to make is, as Texas fans, we just don't really need that. We've been rooting for Alabama to look good up until this point. But I think now is the point where we just need Georgia to take care of business in this game.
Yep.
And so, look, I think Alabama could absolutely win it. I'm probably leaning 52-48 Georgia, like 52% Georgia, 48% Alabama. Like it's really close. I could even see Alabama covering the 6-point spread or whatever it is. But I'm going to take Georgia to win by about 4. I'm going to say 31-27.
Yeah, I think I'm going to take Georgia also. I'm not going to give a score, but I think it's mostly just because, I mean, you've made all your points clear. I think it's also just that the Auburn game, the final play where Milroe hit that guy in the back left of the end zone, like the crazy, like 4th down play. Auburn had a spy on a 4th and 20 whatever where they were rushing 3. Like that's incompetency right there. That's incompetency. So it's like, what was that really just a look ahead game, or are those warts going to be showing up for Alabama? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. With that, let's get to gut check. You go first.
Yeah. Let's quickly explain what we're going to be doing here. So, a few weeks ago, I came up with the idea of basically a prompt statement, and the other person has to just go with your gut on whatever they feel about that statement, and then we just discuss. So, for my first gut check of the night, it's a multi-layered question. So, my question to you is, when it comes to deciding who makes the college football playoff ranking, or who makes the college football playoff, I want you to rank these 4 criteria on your personal scale: eye test, overall strength of schedule, and statistical footprint. Like which of those would you say you value the most?
Can you repeat them again? So eye
I
test,
test overall
statistical
strength of
footprint.
schedule, and then statistical footprint would just be the overall, just what the numbers say on said team, like offense efficiency, defense efficiency, all that type of stuff.
Um, I think for me, strength of schedule is number one because I think it
Right.
matters who you're playing and actually when you play them. So that's number one. Close number two is probably eye test. Um, I also think that matters. Um, and then I would even put head to head, the head to head factor
Right.
at number three, a little ahead of um, statistical footprint. Because the numbers tell some of the story, but not the full story.
Right.
I think the numbers support what some of these teams have done, but games are played on the field at the end of the day,
Yeah.
not on paper. And so I think I would go strength of schedule first, eye test second, head to head third, and then um, statistics fourth. What do you think?
I think I would be right around the same. Um, I think it also just depends on like what teams are like you're comparing in that specific moment. Because if you're comparing, say, Oregon to Michigan, for example, in terms of ordering which team would be higher and all that type of stuff, it's hard to fault Oregon for losing that Washington game when they did, because of the strength of schedule and the absolute like gauntlet that was the Pac-12 this year. But at the same time, Michigan was dominant throughout the entire season, and in the big moment against Ohio State, got it done. So I think the overall body of work in terms of the eye test, I think I would put in front of statistical footprint as well. I 100% agree with you.
Okay, interesting. I wish we could be on the committee.
Yeah.
All right. Here we go. Here's my first question. You saw the way that the situation went down in College Station over the weekend with their coaching search, with it about to be Mark Stoops, and then they turned to Mike Elko. You think at best Mike Elko is a C plus hire, and that A&M will forever be stuck in neutral? Buy or sell?
Well, I think um, it's hard to break out of purgatory in the SEC. It really is. I think when you're recruiting at the level of Texas A&M and you still struggle to get the victories, I think it goes beyond just the talent on the field in the SEC. It's just some of it is luck, some of it is things have to come together at the right time. Like for this season, they lost Connor Wayman very early on, and that really hurt them. And yeah, I don't love the hire. No, I don't think anybody really does outside of maybe Homer A&M people, but I don't know about stuck in neutral forever. I think it's all relative. Um, when it comes to like making progress in the SEC, like I don't know how they're really gonna do that. Like with just not going out and making the splash higher. I think it's and the way that they handled it. It makes people feel like that this is like a unstable program, and why would
Yeah.
a transfer want to go to College Station when it's like they're just if this feels like an imploding ship?
One of the reasons I worded the question that way, and one of the reasons, of course, I want to talk about it because it's big news in college football. But, and you knew I was going to bring it up
Mm.
when I said spicy in my text to you when we were talking about this particular segment. But one of the things the AD at A&M said, Ross Bjork, um, in one of his press availabilities earlier this week, is he said the reason we fired Jimbo Fisher, the reason we were willing to go to the lengths that we went to with that buyout, the $76 million or whatever the hell they paid Jimbo Fisher to not coach their football team any longer. One of the reasons they did that was because they thought they were stuck in neutral. And these were his words. They thought they weren't really going anywhere. There wasn't any progress. And I'm sure there were other factors. And he kind of made an analogy to kind of, you got a lot of talent. You're going 55, 60, in the right, or, and then everyone else is going 85, 90 on the highway. And I thought, along with many others in the industry, think that, look, I think Mike Elko is a really solid coach. Like, he is a good, substantive football coach. Even I think in the 2 years at Duke, although it wasn't great, like, he won 9 games at Duke. That's pretty damn good.
Yeah.
And I thought he was overall really good again this year. It's just his quarterback, Riley Leonard, got hurt, and that kind of derailed their season a little bit. So I think he's like a B football coach. I think he's a B plus football coach. But when you go to these lengths to kind of get yourself stuck out of neutral, as hard as it is to do already in any other conference, to do it in the SEC, as you spoke to, is even harder. I think you got to go out, especially after you paid that buyout to get that guy out of town. You got to go out and try to get as close to a guarantee on the box as you can.
Yeah.
Make Urban Meyer say no. Make Dabo Sweeney, even though some people say he wouldn't be, forget about fit. Fit is win football games.
Yeah.
You got to make one of those top-notch guys. Make Ryan Day, who was in the rumors at one point, say no. It just felt a little underwhelming to go with Mike Elko, even though I think Mike Elko is a good football. He will do a good job there because I think part of what A&M needs is the culture. I don't think they have the winning culture yet. They have a lot of talent, but I think they kind of need what I think Sark has kind of brought to this Texas program, and it is built now within this Texas program, is that winning culture. It just feels different this year. Like, they're all about winning. They're all pushing in one direction. It kind of feels like at A&M, everyone's pulling kind of in a different direction. That's just what it feels like to me on the outside. I think Mike Elko will do a good job there. I think there will be years where they win potentially 9 or 10 games and find themselves in the 12-team college football playoff. But when you put yourself as one of these programs that expects to not only win, but win championships, that's where I'm coming from on this hire. And that's where A&M fans should be coming from on this hire as well. Like, is Mike Elko that guy that is going to win championships? I doubt it.
Yeah, we'll see. I think with how the SEC is going to look next year with no divisions, like it's it's only going to get tougher than what it already has been. That's the crazy part. So we'll see how it goes, but oh boy, oh boy, A&M, get it together, man, or maybe don't. I don't care. Um, all right, my next gut check for you is with all of the conference realignment that has taken place or that will take place going into next year. Which program do you think will be the biggest winners out of the situation? Which, like, um, obviously, there's a lot of different directions you can go with that. But is there a specific program that comes to mind that's moving conferences or is staying within a conference that has a lot of movement that will benefit greatly from it?
Um, One that comes to mind right away is Utah. I think Utah moving to the Big 12 not only is going to immediately contend for conference championships, but can set themselves up well with what Kyle Whittingham has done with that program, and with Cam Rising coming back healthy next year, as he was just totally taken out of the equation this year, unfortunately for them. I think immediately they will be really well set up. Now, with some of the things that they can add to what they do in recruiting with the Texas footprint and the Oklahoma footprint and the Louisiana footprint, even. I think Utah is the first program that comes to mind, just because I think they're already kind of established as a really good program over the past decade. But I think now, with some of the uncertainty around, say, K-State with Will Howard leaving and entering the transfer portal, and some uncertainty around TCU after what they accomplished last year, not having the season they wanted to this year. I think with Colorado still building, and I think Arizona is another program that could potentially be in kind of the same situation with Jed Fish as Kyle Whittingham with Utah. I think those two programs are really well set up going into next year, going into a Big 12 that's void of now Texas and Oklahoma, the big dogs. Those were the two that came to mind right away.
Yeah, I think Utah is the main one that came to mind for me as well. I think I also considered Oregon and Washington in this question just because from a standpoint of if I'm going to have, great players come through my program, now I get to be on the big stage in the Big 10 and I believe it's going to be Big 10 on CBS next year, I think.
Yep.
But no matter the case, you're getting more primetime games. You're not going to be buried over in the West Coast. And I think that's going to not only bring in more money to the program, but also bring in opportunities for your players for awards, for Heisman contention, all those types of things. And obviously, we've seen players win the Heisman in the past for those teams, but I think it's worth acknowledging that it's a different type of feel when you're going and playing in prime time for the East Coast, where you're having the entire country tune in.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be good for those programs as well, because there's a little bit of a different, I think, recruiting footprint that you can get
Yeah.
from that as well. So we'll see. I'm super excited for realignment, but great question. I wouldn't have even thought of it this segment from a realignment standpoint because it's kind of just been uh, kind of in the background right now with everything that we have coming up with the transfer portal opening and um, signing day coming up for recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. My next question. Um, I'm trying to figure out how I want to word it. You think that the Texas player with the best chance. It's kind of a two-part question. The Texas player with the best chance to be drafted in the first round is blank, and then the Texas player expected to declare for the draft that may actually return next season is blank. Because I have heard, and industry sources have heard, that outside of Quinn Ewers, there's another player out there that we think or we assume is going to enter the draft that has already made a decision that he wants to come back to Texas. So it's kind of a two-part question.
Okay.
The player on Texas's team that you think has the best chance to be a first-round pick if he does enter the draft, and then the player out there that people aren't expecting to come back, but that may come back this year or next year.
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to that. I think
I can give you my answer while you think about it.
yeah.
If you want.
Go ahead and give me your answer. Let me see.
I think the player with the body of work that he's put together this year that has the best chance of being a first round pick is T'Vondre Sweat. I think you can make an argument for Xavier Worthy and or Adonai Mitchell right behind him. But I think with the body of work he's put together, I think the obvious answer is T'Vondre Sweat. Now, for the second part of the question, my gut tells me, and when I kind of read the tea leaves of this whole Quinn Ewers situation, with obviously the reports being that he's probably leaning towards coming back to Texas next year. I think the player that people think's long gone after this year, that may be the player that's reported to be coming back, is Ja'Tavion Sanders. That's what I think, but that's just my gut feeling. Do you have thoughts?
I think you're onto something there. I think having an extra year for Jatavion would be not only you get a chance to be fully healthy and be maybe the top draft rather than shadow of Brock Bowers, but I also think there would be a much more prominent role in the offense that would open up. Um, as of right now, he was really the third option, but when you like take into account how much his team runs the football, he's getting a very small, portion of target here at the moment. So, um, I can definitely see coming back. Absolutely. And
Yeah,
as
and
for the first part
another
of the
part
question,
of it is.
it
Oh, go ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
Oh,
I'll answer the first part, and then I'll say what I was going to say.
okay, gotcha. Yeah. T'Vondre Sweat is the obvious one, 100%. I had to check and double check which players were draft eligible. But yeah, T'Vondre Sweat. I
Vondre.
can't talk tonight. I mean, we said it earlier. I mean, he's on the ballot for the best interior defensive lineman award in college football. And you could argue, I mean, he's the heart and soul of this team. I mean,
He
without
is.
him, I mean, the run defense, that was, I think, is the biggest strength of either unit, offense or defense, is the run defense as of right now, and he is the heart and soul of that. And I think you throw him into any NFL system where you ask him to two gap, three eye. I think he'll thrive. Um, I think
I agree.
maybe somewhere in the 20s in the first round would be, I mean, realistic in my
I
opinion.
I agree with you. A couple of things I'll say before we move on and you get to your next question. Um, I think one of the reasons I think Jatavion Sanders is a likely candidate for that particular player that's coming back next year that we don't necessarily think is going to come back is because number one, next year he could be flat out the best tight end in the class, in the draft class. With Brock Bowers being that this year, I think he kind of gets overlooked a little bit. That's just my opinion. Number two, Ja'Vion Sanders has kind of been banged up a little this year. Um, I think he had to miss one or two games, and he's kind of been in and out with some injuries, been dealing with some stuff. So maybe he wants an opportunity to showcase a full season of productivity,
Mhm.
being more featured in the offense, being the guy in the offense. Because if you think about next year, with what we expect to happen, with Jordan Whittington definitely gone, Xavier Worthy probably definitely gone, and likely AD Mitchell gone, you're going to have a group of young receivers at the wide receiver position. I think Texas is going to go into the portal and get a more experienced guy, like I think Sark will always pretty much do from here on out every year. Uh, but you're going to have the Ryan Wingos of the world, the DeJounte Cooks of the world, the Ryan Niblets and the DeAndre Moores of the world being your wide receiver group. I think JT Sanders could have an opportunity to be kind of the future guy in the offense and to really maybe vault himself into a top 15 type draft pick next year because talent's not the issue
Yeah.
with him. It's just volume and staying on the field. The last thing I'll say, and then I'll let you get to your next question. I think the other guy that comes to mind, the guy who's draft eligible, who I think might be the guy that comes back, is Byron Murphy.
Mm.
But I think it's less likely that he's the guy than Jatavion Sanders just because he's already accepted his invitation for the Senior Bowl. And I think that's a sign that, yeah, I mean, he's going. But I think he could potentially, if he doesn't hear what he wants to hear, after those evaluations occur at the Senior Bowl and at the Combine, maybe decide to come back to Texas and kind of do what T'Vondre Sweat did last year. People thought T'Vondre Sweat was gone last year, but he decided to come back and look at the player he's turned into being. I think maybe Byron Murphy might be that candidate going into next year, but I think it's more likely at this point, all signs pointing towards Byron Murphy being in the NFL next year. So I'll stop talking. What's your next question?
I mean, it's interesting info for sure. I don't know what to really think of that. I think Byron Murphy, if he were to stay, just from a trenches standpoint, that would help the team so much. But
It
moving
would.
on, my next question is, and I actually didn't have this one pre-prepared. This is one that I have thought of on the pod, on the spot. Um, the question for you is: Steve Sarkisian and Brent Venables are the blank best coaches in the SEC next year. Like,
Ooh.
where would you rank them right away in the SEC? And maybe to make it easier, you could even uh, like divide it into like parts somehow. But this
Okay,
it's a
real
it's a
fast.
definitely a interesting uh, thought experiment, I guess.
Well, let's talk this out a little bit. I think obviously uh, Kirby and Nick are 1 and 2 or 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Beyond that, though, I think you could potentially argue Brian Kelly's number 3, just based on track record, what he did at Notre Dame, what he's done at LSU so far, even though some people could argue that 9 and 3 for LSU after what they did last year is somewhat of a disappointing season. I think what he's done at LSU so far through 2 years, with the roster not necessarily being exactly where he wants it to be yet,
Yeah.
has been fantastic. I'd probably put Brian Kelly, I'd give him the benefit of the doubt at number 3. Beyond that, I think after what Eli Drinkwitz has done a really good job with Missouri.
Yeah.
But he's kind of in that territory with Sark where it's like, okay, you've now gotten to a point where you're doing it. You're doing the damn thing. You've won double-digit games. You're going to be playing in the New Year's Six Bowl. You've elevated your program back to where it probably needs and should be, more so on Texas' side than Missouri, but I think they're kind of similar in that way. I think Drinkwitz, who I really like actually, as both a personality and a coach, a football coach, is in that next tier. I think the first tier is I think it's probably easier if you do it in tiers.
Mm-hmm.
My tier 1 is probably based on track record and career and what they've done lately, Nick, Kirby, and Brian. But I think tier 2, I think I'd put Sark in tier 2. I'd put Eli Drinkwitz in tier 2. I'd put Mark Stoops, what he's done with Kentucky, right up there. And then probably Lane Kiffin, what he's done at Ole Miss. Those would be tier 1 and tier 2 for me. I think there are a lot of other good coaches.
Josh Heupel at Tennessee, or is that his name?
I think you could put him up there in tier 2 with those next group of coaches, guys who have done it maybe once before, and you can see like their vision and you can see what they're building towards, but they're not on the level yet of Kirby, Nick, and Brian Kelly. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the only change I would make is I would have Nick and Kirby in tier 1, in that order, and then I think I would probably have Brian Kelly in his own tier, as a tier 2, just because of I think what he did at Notre Dame with their academic standards and all of that, leading them to national championships and being a perennial contender. I think that's where I would give him the benefit of the doubt as well. But then tier 3, I think it would be much of the same. I think it would be the Missouri coach, Sark, all those names you just mentioned. I think the other interesting part of this question is, of course, Venables, because he's really turned it on as a defensive coach this season. We've seen that team really turn it around a little bit and then kind of fall back here lately defensively. But you see the effect he's having, or we at least saw it in the Texas game, in their biggest game of the season.
Yeah. And then there's a tier below those guys, for me at least, Venables, Sark, Drinkwitz at Missouri, Heupel at Tennessee. A tier below those guys are the guys that I would say the newcomers / guys I still believe in, but haven't had the success yet. And those guys are Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Sam Pittman at Arkansas. He's going to get one more year after a disastrous year this year at Arkansas. And then South Carolina's coach, Shane Beamer. I think, look, Spencer Rattler declaring for the NFL is going to hurt them, but there's already a plethora of quarterbacks good quarterbacks at that have entered the transfer portal. And I think Shane Beamer, with the offensive mind that he is going to go get one of those guys. So I think, that would kind of be my tiers. But I love college football gut check. I think is going to make a frequent appearance, especially in the off season,
Definitely.
on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. Great question. All right, I'll do one more, and then you do one more, and then we'll wrap this thing up. I'm not sure we'll get to the SEC schedule tonight, but that's okay. We can save that for a later episode, and I can just edit that out of the description and the title later on. All right. For my last question, I didn't really pre-prepare this or anything, but right off the top of my head, the nightmare scenario for the College Football Playoff Committee. Here it is. Texas wins the Big 12 championship game. Let's say Oregon wins the Pac-12 championship game. So we got a one-loss conference champion, Texas. We've got a one-loss conference champion, Oregon. Let's say Alabama wins the SEC championship game. So we've got dominant Georgia. They're 12-1, but they lost a close game to Alabama. You also have conference champion Alabama, who's 12-1, but lost to Texas. Let's say Michigan wins, which we fully expect them to. So they're 13-0. They're in. And let's say, what do we want to do at Florida State in this scenario? Let's say Florida State
Let's say
wins.
they win.
Let's say they win, but they don't look very good. Who do you put in that scenario?
Well, I think
Because it comes down to best against most deserving. Like, you got to kind of combine the two, in my opinion. So what do you think?
Right.
Michigan's
I
in.
think
Michigan's in.
Michigan's 100% in. And right off the bat, I'm going to say Oregon as well.
Yep.
And then the Florida State conversation is an interesting one. The fact that they're onto their backup quarterback, and it's a different team now. I mean, Jordan Travis was, he was so important to them. I mean, obviously, any star quarterback on any team is going to be important, but for them specifically, his playmaking ability, his just leadership. I don't know, man. I think you have to put them in if they're undefeated, but you don't feel good about it. Definitely not. And then the SEC situation. It's hard for me to see a scenario where the committee leaves the SEC champion out of the playoff. And if Alabama wins, I think Georgia's in also. So I think I would probably take out Florida State and have Alabama and Georgia, as much as I hate that.
That's why I call it the nightmare scenario for the committee. Because if you put Alabama in and you leave Texas out,
people are going to riot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Both one loss. I think the Oklahoma loss is going to hurt Texas more than the Alabama win is going to help them. I think that's what the committee has told us to this point. Because why else is Texas behind Oregon, behind Ohio State? It's because I think, this is my opinion, and eye test also plays a factor into this up until last weekend, but I think the committee views Oregon's loss at Washington and Ohio State's loss at Michigan to be much better losses than Texas' last second loss against Oklahoma. I think that plays a big factor into this. And I don't think the Texas win over Alabama is not that it's not being given enough credit, because that's really the reason that Texas is in this spot to begin with. But I just don't think it's getting the push that you otherwise think it would be in this scenario. My question is there a point value, a point differential that Texas could beat Oklahoma State by that could just flat out like will the committee to put them in a scenario where, like we just talked about, like what if they, I don't think this is likely, but what if they beat Texas Tech by 50 and they turn around and beat Oklahoma State, a team that's ranked inside the top 20 by like 40 or something like that? Like what happens in that scenario? There are so many questions, and I just want the games to be played and these questions to be answered.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, honestly. And let's say all of those same things happen in that scenario and Florida State loses. What do you do with Ohio State in that scenario? I don't know, honestly, if you would um put them in, but I mean they would be in the conversation at that point if we see carnage.
yeah, I think Ohio State needs Florida State and Texas to lose, because
Yeah.
I don't think they're putting Ohio State in over one-loss conference champions. Um,
Yeah.
that wouldn't make any sense to me. But I think if Texas loses to Oklahoma State and Florida State loses, I think we could end up with a scenario similar to last year where kind of Ohio State maybe backdoors its way into the top four. Um, but I mean, we could sit here for hours and talk about these scenarios. So we're just going to let the games play out. For Texas, I think you root for Georgia to take care of business because you don't want this Alabama smoke. Um, and then, I mean, we saw that game on the football field, but what I'm talking about when I say smoke is they're not going to leave 12-1 SEC championship Nick Saban Bama out of the playoff. They're just not going to do it, whether it's fair or not, as you
Yeah.
mentioned. So you don't want that to be in the conversation. You want Bama to be out. You want Georgia to take care of business. You need Louisville to take care of business, and you got to win in Arlington. And those three things, I think Texas is in. I think the playoff I'd most like to see would be Georgia, Michigan, Oregon, and Texas. I agree with what Joel Klatt said on his podcast today. I think if that happened and say we got Georgia against Oregon, or sorry, Georgia against Texas and Michigan against Oregon, that would be an absolutely fantastic playoff.
Michigan against Oregon sounds amazing. Oh my gosh. And then a rematch next year in the Big Ten.
Yeah, exactly. And
Oh my
then you're
God.
going to get Georgia against Texas and a rematch next year on
Next year.
October 19th in Austin.
I mean, you can't write it any better. I mean,
Exactly. Yeah. One last question from you, and then we'll wrap this thing up. Did you have anything else?
well, I did, but I don't know if it's podcast worthy. I didn't like it. Let me see if I can think of something on the spot. I'll just say what it was. The question was, it pertained to Marvin Harrison Jr. Um, and basically I worded it as Marvin Harrison Jr. is the best wide receiver to enter the draft since blank.
Ooh.
But since like the podcast went in like this direction with like college football scenarios. I didn't think it fit, but we can get into this conversation. I think it's good enough.
Yeah,
I
it's
guess.
Marvin Harrison, the best receiver to enter the draft. That's a loaded question because there have been a ton of great
Yeah,
receivers.
it's I think you can look at it from a prospect standpoint. I think that's probably the better way to do it rather than looking at it like a hindsight is 2020. Because obviously you look at it like, oh, Justin Jefferson entered the draft like 3 years ago. But um as a prospect though, entering the draft as highly touted as he is, at being regarded as a blue chip, basically can't miss guy. Um, I don't know if we've seen something like that since Julio Jones, maybe.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. I have to think on it more. One of my questions, I don't think we'll have time for it, was actually going to be a start bench cut with the 3 Bolitnikov finalists. It was
Mm,
it's Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, and Romo Dunze of Washington.
mm.
Those are the 3 Bolitnikov finalists, and I was going to do
Wow.
a start bench cut with those 3 guys. If you're building a team, obviously, I think Marvin Harrison would be the start, but who would be the bench and who would be the cut between Neighbors and Odunze?
It's really close, but I think I would bench Neighbors and cut Dunze. But it's so close. And the fact that like the wide receiver class is so deep that Keon Coleman isn't even mentioned, which is just insane to me. Like this wide receiver class, you're going to get a guy like Adonai Mitchell, for example, going in the late first to second round. Like it's going to be there's a lot of really good receivers in this class.
One of the things that we're going to do on DIT-HOL, and we can figure out the details later as we enter,
Draft season.
because after this weekend, we get a week or two before bowl season, and then a lot of those bowls, like I'll watch some of these games, but they don't really, in the grand scheme of things, mean much.
Yeah.
So we're not really going to talk about them on this podcast. We will talk about the New Year's Six and the playoff, of course, because those games matter a little more. And Texas will likely be playing in one of those games. I think win or lose on Saturday, they'll be playing in a New Year's Six. But one of the things I think we'll do, along with everything else we're going to have to talk about in the off season once we get there, and I'm talking after the national championship game, is we'll find a way to do draft content on Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. This will be our starting point for early draft content before we kind of get to the main stuff on our main feed. I haven't thought of a way that we'll do that yet. I don't know if it's doing position by position breakdowns or whatever it may be,
I
or
think
mock
there's
drafts.
there's definitely a path we can take where it's like almost like a draft from like a college scope, like almost doing it by a conference maybe.
Yeah, that might be the way we do it. We'll figure it out, but that's going to be something to look forward to this offseason, along with transfer portal. In fact, we already got a bunch of transfer portal news. Uh, Max Johnson, the A&M quarterback, is going to be transferring to North Carolina. And I know
Ooh.
you say, well, the portal hasn't even opened yet. It doesn't open until Monday. This coming Monday is when it officially opens. But there is an exception when your coach gets fired, as Jimbo Fisher did. You're allowed to go in early, and that's why Max Johnson ends up at UNC. So they have their guy for when Drake May departs. So with all that being said, thank you guys for tuning into this longer but very, very, very good edition of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. I thoroughly enjoyed the gut check segment. I thoroughly enjoyed
that was a lot of fun.
breaking down these great games that we're going to get this weekend, as always. I may or may not do another HOL solo on Friday because there's a lot of college basketball I want to talk about as well. And then there are recruiting rumors and transfer portal rumors abound that kind of need to be mentioned on the Texas front, at least. So we may or may not do that. If not, Amy and I will be back together next week talking more college basketball probably than college football. We'll probably do a segment on college football, depending on how the playoff actually shakes out, what the selection is on Sunday.
Depending on how pissed off we are.
If Texas gets in, we'll definitely be doing that. But if not, we'll wait a couple weeks before we start breaking down the playoff and the New Year's Six. So thank you guys. Thank you everybody for listening. I mean, I have to go figure out what we're going to do about this NBA episode and our NFL power rankings. But until then, hook 'em horns. Let's go beat Oklahoma State, and let's win this conference title on our way out of the Big 12. Fuck Brett Yormark. Good night.
Yep, the farewell fuck you tour final stop.